Hello, I am Patty Azar, and today I am your moderator for the live virtual event for Global Chamber. And today our topic is jumping into international. You folks out there who have joined us are very, very fortunate because I have three really rock stars that really understand the international market. And today we're going to answer questions and give you some real practical tips if, number one, you're already in the market, maybe some things you need to change. Number two, why you should go into the market. And number three, if you're not there, what are a few tips and a few ideas that could help get you there. But before I begin, I really want to introduce our three participants today. And the first one is Doug Brunke. Doug is the CEO and founder of Global Chamber, which I feel very, very honored and privileged to have an association with because I am a strategic affiliate with the Global Chamber, and that's why I'm able to join you today. Secondly, I have Elisa Joyce. Elisa is a rock star in her own right. She is the chairman of the Consular Corps of Arizona. At the same time, she's a business consultant, while at the same time she is the honorary counsel for the Consulate of Switzerland. Hello, Elisa.
Hi, how are you?
Wonderful. And now we've got someone, Doug Weeks, excuse me, not Doug Weeks, I'm sorry, Marty Weems, and Marty is the Vice President, Strategic Business International. And one reason you really want to listen to Marty is because not only does he beat his forecast out selling internationally, he also collects all of the money, which is so important if you're out there driving strategy. So when I saw that he had like 130% of goal, plus he collected 100%, this guy will really be able to help you understand how to sell and then also how to collect your monies internationally. So welcome to all three, and today we're going to have a really fun conversation and enjoy listening to these three experts. So Doug, you know, when you embarked upon opening and starting to be the brainchild and the visionary for the Global Chamber, one of the reasons is because so many organizations and companies out there have not chosen to be or go international. So do you see the trend changing? And part B of that is where geographically and in what industries?
Sure. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Patty. Yeah, no question the world is changing. 20 or 30 years ago, I know I look very young, but you know, in early part of my career, I worked for the DuPont company, big multinational company, and I honestly felt very alone in those days, talking to and driving change in a big corporation to go global. There were very few people within the company that went global, and less than 50% of the revenue, far less than 50% of the revenue in most businesses 20, 30 years ago were international. These days, I don't know what it is exactly, but I know for Intel, a company like DuPont, it's over 70% is outside the U.S., and so we know the big companies have changed significantly. We also know that the small and medium-sized companies are expressing a lot more interest than they used to. Just last night, a couple of folks that I ran into at an event that 5 years ago we were talking about international and their eyes kind of glazed over. Both of the people that I mentioned there were saying that number one priority for their business was global. So even though less than 1% of U.S. companies export, and over half of those export to only one country, and over half of those, the one country is Mexico or Canada, it says that very little international business, multi-country international business is happening, and it's definitely not outside Mexico and Canada. There's a lot of opportunity, and so when there was a survey recently by small and medium-sized companies, or of them in the UK, where 40% of SMEs in the UK want to be global in 5 years. You know, imagine what's going to happen going forward. So there's been a significant shift over the last several decades. It seems to be accelerating, and to go from way less than 1% to 40%, if the UK numbers are correct, for SMEs would be a significant change, and we're seeing that every day, and it's very encouraging.
Well, that's wonderful. Now, I know that we have those out of our Fortune 100 and 500 and 1,000 companies. But what about for some of the small companies here
Well,
and throughout the United States?
the multinationals globally are there, and to your point, the SMEs are getting there. There is a shift. I don't have any data that demonstrates it, but there's clear indication that the SMEs are much more global than they used to be. And there's a lot driving that. Technology is driving it, right? Pick up and do business from your phone. We couldn't do that 10 years ago as easily and proficiently as we do today. Young people are driving the change. Old people like me, we're stodgy, we don't change very fast, and young people are not that way. They want to impact the world. They have social changes they want to make. They travel themselves and they see ideas in other countries. They go to other countries and see holes where a product or a service could go, and they ask why not. And so I think, no question, technology and small and young people are driving the change, and we're going to see more and more. Of course, the third area is money. There's health and wealth increasing all over the world, nearly every country, and it's shifting. So where in the U.S., many companies could exist on the market in the U.S., that's not the case all the time. There's so much more opportunity. 84% of wealth increase over the next 5 years is going to be outside the U.S. So companies outside the U.S., companies in Europe have already been in that change. We're seeing that change all over the world. And where are we seeing it? We're seeing it in technology industries. We're seeing it in medical. We're seeing it in services. We're seeing it in manufacturing. Basic manufacturing is shifting as well. We have someone at Global Chamber, a State Department fellow from Laos, and she was saying that 97% of medical products in Laos are imported products. And
Really?
so what it again indicates is that there are an awful lot of opportunities all over the world. We just need to jump on it, and companies are, and they're going to be increasingly jumping on it more and more.
And I know when we give talk and before, you also talked about there's like a 15% increase in gross margins if you export from the U.S.
There's actually been data that's shown, whether it's some data on the small and mediums and also companies that are on the stock market, that if you export and you're involved with international business, you're actually statistically more profitable. And I think the data that you picked out there, the 15% more profitable, was one of the studies. It might have been Harvard or some university pulled that information together. So it's intuitively correct, right? Because if the companies that are going international are typically structurally and foundationally sound, if you try to go international, if you can't even sell across the street, why would you sell internationally? You're probably going to have a challenge because there's all sorts of additional things that you need to think about. So if you can sell across the street, sell across your state, sell across your country, why not then the next step be selling in another country? And if you're able to get to that point, you're fairly foundationally stable, or you should be, and so that allows you then to get to the next level. And so that's why, intuitively, I think that makes sense, and actually now the data shows that it's actually true.
Well, isn't that interesting? Because just today IBM announced that they're laying off thousands of folks, but they're rehiring 20,000 new employees in order to be able to get in the cloud and to be able to expand their global presence. So I guess that could be a good testimony for us today, and to be able to support the Global Chamber.
The cloud really is just a manifestation of what we're talking about, right?
Yes.
In terms of, think outside your hometown. I remember when I first started my career, many decades ago. I was a single man, and I was in Beaumont, Texas, which is 84 miles west of Houston, or east of Houston. It's not the end of the world, but you can see it from there. And the first date I ever had was with a woman who had never been to Houston. She had once been over the border in Louisiana. So, undoubtedly there are situations in the world, maybe many of them, where people stay in their own village, but the cloud is a representation that really we can connect up with each other all sorts of ways. through technology, through all sorts of logistics systems, through techniques like we're doing today in Google Hangouts. These were things that were not available before, but we can do these. We can talk to someone, as I did this morning, one of our executive directors in Kathmandu, Nepal, having a face-to-face conversation, talking about things that are going on there. So these things were not possible before, and it's one of the things clearly, besides the opportunity, that's driving the change.
Well, I love it because you give us a foundation of why to even expand our thinking, much less expand our actual business practices. So, Elisa, I really want to ask you to be able to add to Doug's responses because you've been out there. You have such a long, wonderful track record of supporting your clients. Could you give us some real experiences that you've had with your clients in regard to their international business, whether it's beginning, increasing it, or just really improving it?
Thank you, Marty, and thank you, Doug. I think that one of the most important things is having an idea about your market. Sometimes it's just intuitive, but then there's a lot of homework to do. And personally, I always think that you have to get boots on the ground. You have to get in touch with the market that you're looking at, and you want to go and talk to people there. You want to go and talk to potential customers. You want to go and talk to potential partners. You want to understand the climate and the regulation and all of those things. But those are that is something that it takes time and it takes energy, but it also builds one's own confidence. If you were talking before about small companies. When you're a big company, you tend to take a different approach through lawyers and accountants.
Yes.
When you're a small company, you've got to get out of your chair and you've got to get out of your comfort zone. But if you've already started a company, you're already used to being out of your comfort zone. And let's say you have a niche product particularly, because as Doug said, one of the reasons that less than 1% of the 30 million companies in the United States export, they don't really need to. They have over 300 million customers right here. For a country like mine, Switzerland, where we have a current population of 8.1 million, if we didn't export, we wouldn't have a market. And so it's of course you don't have to export sandwiches, but you do have to export cheese. And Switzerland is actually very much into life sciences and biomedical, and people think of us as watches and cuckoo clocks, cheese and chocolate, but in fact, it's really our bigger niche, our more impactful, and our growth area is medical and life sciences, and we know that we don't have the population for that, so we know we have to look outside. It's one of the reasons that Switzerland is the 6th largest foreign direct investor in the United States. For a little tiny country, that's a big impact. But you can't, especially if you have a niche product, even if you're in the US and you have a niche product, you really need, if you're going to grow, you're really going to have to look elsewhere. And if you're going to look elsewhere, you have to do your homework, and then you have to get boots on the ground, and you have to understand your market a little bit so that it isn't, so you can see if there's a way to start small, and then there's of course the homework. The homework isn't as much fun, like regulatory issues, finance issues. I know we're going to discuss those later. That's a different layer. But when you have a feel, when you go to the country, and you have a feeling, you get a feeling about it. I, for example, was interested in products in South America. Then I took money and got on a plane and landed in Quito, and then started my exploration, and for several weeks. And I basically just got to know the country, got to know the people, traveled all over. It's bigger than you think, and straddled the equator because there has to be a moment of tourism, and that's also part of understanding the country. I think that you have to. You build a level of comfort, and it makes it much easier to take it to the next level. And I promise you that when I went to Ecuador for the first time, I spoke Italian, but I worked on my Spanish on the plane ride there, and I just dove in and tried. You know, it's a little bit tough, but it's the most interesting, and you start to get a feeling of whether it's going to work or not.
So, what built your confidence that you could go to another culture and do that type of intelligence work, not knowing the folks, or did you have an agent or someone who said you can trust these folks to give you the right data?
I have to admit that I kind of went in naked. Most of the places that I've gone to, I literally bought myself a ticket, got off the plane, and started exploring. I often did a little bit of homework before. What gave me the confidence? I don't know that I had the confidence. I just figured that what's the worst that can happen? You know, it doesn't work out. It's not a good market. It's not going to be interesting. I'm not going to find the partners. The worst that was going to happen was that it would be a failure, but it's never really a failure because you learn something. You learn more than you knew before you got on the plane. And so for me personally, I think that I was very lucky. I was exposed to people from many different countries as a child, and sometimes they were immigrants, but their parents were from different countries. And so I think that the world didn't seem to me like such a scary place. And I can tell you, having been to some places that could technically be a little bit scary, I really don't find that it is scary. I find that people are people. There are good people and there are bad people. And you have to use common sense, and you have to be strong and independent. But you build relationships and you ask questions. I can tell you that when I first got to Ecuador, it really wasn't where the first week and a half I was really not getting to where I wanted to get. It was very hard to get people to talk to me and to answer me and to get the information that I wanted. And I ended up going to the central bank in Quito and meeting with central bankers. And I learned that one of the customs, for example, was they didn't have the outright bakshish that I've encountered in places in the Middle East, but it was very nice if you took a basket of cooking oil and a few food things. And so when I went to the export office to go and ask some questions, I went and took this basket. I was very well received. And you learn that by asking people, well, sometimes you go the first time, it doesn't work very well. The central bank, in the end, they were extraordinarily helpful. But it took 2 or 3 visits and going to talk to people. I don't believe that there's anything that beats a personal relationship. And just as Doug was talking about his conversation with a colleague in Kathmandu, I had a conversation with a colleague in Israel today. I had a conversation with a colleague in Switzerland today. My hours can run a bit strange. Sometimes I'm up till 3 in the morning, and it doesn't bother me. I don't mind. I'll have a nap in the afternoon. It's exciting. It's stimulating and exciting. And Doug, it keeps us young.
Young at heart, anyway. Yeah, absolutely.
So, Lisa, when you return after doing your investigation and doing your intelligence work, what are your next steps to putting that relationship together?
Homework. So now
Okay.
now one has to get serious about understanding the regulations and doing things correctly. You can check out now. I mean, it's when I was doing things 20, 25 years ago, as Doug said, it's much easier now to get data and get information. And so I am looking at those regulatory things. Recently, on a company that wanted to build their business, and they wanted to sell, and they weren't sure if they wanted to sell or if they wanted to build their business, and they asked me. So I went over to that country, and they weren't really forthcoming with information. So I tried to spend as much time as I could with them, and then I came back and did my own due diligence. When I flew back a month later, they were absolutely shocked by the information that I had. They had absolutely no idea that a lot of what they do is trackable, and that I could extrapolate, use the information that I had and extrapolate out to their actual numbers. I was extremely close on their actual numbers, and to help them identify markets and to help them identify a strategy for international growth, because they were also in a very small country with a population of 8 million people. They didn't have, they just didn't. They had really saturated. The truth is, they hadn't saturated their own market, but there was more potential for growth in big markets. Now, certain things that I identified for them, for example, in China and India, I wouldn't go into China and India without having a local partner. I mean, you really can't. You can't go into. You can't. In my experience, and maybe I'm not the most experienced person. In my experience, you can't go into China and protect your intellectual property without a really, really solid partner. And it's in my opinion, you can even give up majority ownership as long as you maintain control. And as long as you're giving that partner, and I was lucky, I had a good partner in India and a good partner in China to present, and we could retain control, and we could count on being able to keep our intellectual property, and there was also an industrial secret in the manufacturing of this particular product. And so there are times that you have to evaluate the market, and you have to get to know your market well enough to know what the best next step is.
And how do you foster those relationships so that they are long-term successful and profitable for everyone?
That's an excellent question.
Well, thank you.
I think that it's like all of our relationships. Be reliable, be responsive, make sure that they can, when they reach out to you, that they can count on you, and vice versa. I think that you build relationships by building trust and by being consistent. There is nothing better than someone who is consistent, who says what they're going to do and then does it, who does what they say they're going to do. That consistency and that reliability, you need it on both sides. There has to be a balance. And oftentimes those introductions come through someone else, and sometimes they absolutely fall into your lap. Serendipity. You know that there's the 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. There's always this magical aspect of luck. But I do find that luck comes after a lot of hard work.
Exactly. And trust and integrity, and people knowing that when you tell them something, you will show up. Your thought and your deeds are aligned.
Yes.
That's perfect. Marty, I want to move on to you because I have to tell you the two words that are in your job description, strategy, I love strategy, and then international. I'm so excited to be able to ask you because you have hands-on experience and successes in many organizations and in many industries. So talk to us from what you're seeing hands-on in the field about the benefits to organizations, large and small, that choose to go global.
Well, a big one, we constantly talk about just the war for talent, the competition for talent in any industry. Every industry I've worked in, we've always been, how can we get more talented people? How can we be the most attractive place to work? And I've found that as we became more international, as our brand became more international, that we became more attractive. People wanted to work for the player in our industry that had the most international footprint, or, it gave us a lot of legitimacy. Even when we were incredibly small. When I joined the company, we had less than 30 people, but we were just beginning to do some international activity, and it really seemed that our international work helped build our brand domestically probably faster than anything we did as a company. So
Wow.
that's a big one. Hey, another big one I would say is a benefit is just reduce volatility of revenue streams, because if one country's up, another one may be down, and you can move resources, you can move focus. For us, for example, the Middle East was going to be a big push for us, as a part of our long-term plan going into this year. But of course, as the year approached, it was the oil prices tank, and the financial opportunities weren't quite the same. So we were able to shift our focus to other foreign markets, and didn't get too bogged down. Now, we haven't walked away from the Middle East. We're still cultivating our relationships there. We're just choosing to be more patient about our process of cultivating that business and those relationships over the long term, and have a longer horizon on our revenue expectations in the Middle East at this time.
That's the beauty of strategy. If you have a strategy, if it's nimble, objective, and still nimble, you can still move and still not give up any geographic areas in the world. You know, it's really interesting to me that you talk about the war on talent. So that tells me that not only did you build your brand, you built yourself internationally as a thought leader in your space. Can you talk about how you used your workforce to help do that so that it allows some expansion out there and or survival when times get tough?
Yeah, so, a few things is, LinkedIn's a magical thing in terms of not only finding people who don't work for you, but using the networks of the people who do. So many of so much of our talent has come from the talent that we already have, their networks. But then also a huge tool we've developed is a fantastic internship program that we think is just a real jewel of our industry. And that has become a great pipeline of talent. A really small percentage of those, 1 or 2%, will hire right after graduation. But because we've been at it a long time, we've had the opportunity to let some of those previous interns get seasoned 5 years or more, and then we tap them on the shoulder and say, how about bringing some of that experience you have in to join us? And that's been fantastic as well. Another really great tool that for us is we took our internal professional education system that we use to educate our staff. We turned that outside facing to become an education provider within our industry. So now we have over 1,000 people a year who come to attend these education events that work in our industry, and we see how they interact with each other. We see their talents. We see their capabilities. We see a lot about their personalities and their work ethic. In the 1, 2 to 4 days that we might see them, some of them may even come through a 3-week education experience, and we're able to mine those education events for some fantastic talent. And quite often they're coming from an international location, or we're running those professional education events in an international location. So therefore we end up with some great international talent, which is interesting because then we can play currencies issues along with talent and market. So, for example, China's a great market for us right now, but if I'm trying to send expat staff from the U.S. or the U.K., they're really expensive. The dollar's strong, and those people want to be paid well. But Brazil and Argentina have actually great people in our industry who are very well educated, very well trained. A good number have gone through our professional education programs, and because of the difficulty of their current economies, because we're willing to pay them in U.S. dollars to go work for us in China and represent our brand, they come out ahead because we're paying them a premium above what they would pay at home. We're saving a little bit of money by using talent that's a little less expensive compared to U.S. or U.K. talent, and our Chinese customers are really quite happy because they see us bringing not just a bunch of Americans to do our consulting work and servicing work with them, but we're bringing an international team to bear on their project.
Well, I love that you turned something that was inward-facing, outward-facing, and that you proved to the world that you believe in what you do internally and that it is a viable product inside the marketplace. I also appreciate that you have great joy in the diversity of your team, and so when you talked about your people, that and for what you do, I can see why that has been such a benefit to you and to the client, because the client understands that it is a world market out there. So you talk about the good stuff. What about some of the disadvantages out there, and some of the hurdles and the obstacles that hurt you out there that you have to be very mindful of?
Yeah, these are the things that you kind of sit in a hotel bar, shake your head, and drink a beer over. Sometimes they can be difficult. Things like currency swings, government interventions, inflation in different markets. Tariffs, taxes, government agency approvals or failure to approve something, export controls here in the U.S. if you have to deal with those. liability against laws that you don't understand, you don't know they exist. It's easy to trip on the thing you don't see. And then the real humdinger is getting into some kind of legal dispute in a foreign court or or arbitration location. So those are just kind of some of the big ones off the top of my head. There's any number of landmines that you don't see coming. That's for sure. But the thing is, we do business all over the world, and somehow we kind of figure it out as we go. And you be cautious, be careful. Don't get too crazy, too greedy. And most of the time, it works out. Pay attention, read the newspaper. Understand what's going on, current events in that country. And a lot of times, you can see where others are maybe stepping on landmines and try to learn from their experience and slow down and learn from that.
Well, that is such great insight. Years ago, kind of parallel to Doug out there, when he was with DuPont, I was with Federal Express. Federal Express entered the global market space and took Americans all around the world. I don't have to tell you, that was a disaster, and it killed our profits. So after 2 years, they got smart and said that they really need to take your advice and Elisa's advice about going inside the country and assimilating with the customs and the folks there that can help you. So how do you find folks that are at your top leadership levels out there, besides just the folks out there selling for you? How do you find people in the leadership roles to be able to assimilate there for you to drive your strategy?
Well, that's a great question, and it's been one of the tougher ones to really sort, because there's a whole lot of people who maybe see a new entrant to the market, see a new business come in, they get wind of you within the industry, and all of a sudden they're trying to put their cousin in front of you, and this is the guy that needs to represent you here and be your country general manager and that kind of thing. And so it's really important to filter that and do a lot of due diligence on the individuals, and take that slow. The old adage of hire slow and fire fast absolutely applies here. And take the time to get to know people and understand what else they have going on, and do as much history, background, due diligence on them as possible. It is becoming a more transparent world. LinkedIn again is a great tool. Granted, anybody can put anything on there, but a great thing is that you can, if you go one step deeper and kind of mine the connections and figure out, okay, where do you say you worked and what do you say you did, and don't just accept the references and the stories that they give, but look for third-party confirmation from a source they didn't give you.
Excellent.
Yeah, so that may be, calling a former employer. It might be calling a former coworker that's not, or contacting them on LinkedIn. So mining their relationships, which quite often can be found on LinkedIn or something similar. That may be, in China, WeChat is king, for example. So you just try to find places to dig up information that they're not necessarily in control of the channel of the information to you. And that can be incredibly revealing, positive and negative.
Exactly, and it takes time and it takes diligence, and you have to stay in process like that. Elisa, what about you? How do you step up and say, I've got my clients out there, to ensure that they've got the right strategic partner out there, folks that either they go to work for them as an employee, or they may be a distributor, or they may just be an agent? How do you help your clients understand who to align with correctly?
Marty's point about nepotism is very well taken. But you can also, I'm sure you found this too, Marty, you can turn it on its head a little bit. When that happens to you, if you're in the right, it depends, again, you have to know the culture that you're in. If you're in a culture where family is extremely important, you turn that around by saying, oh, that's so wonderful, because basically the family is going to be responsible for the success. And again, this only works in this doesn't work in every culture. This works in specific circumstances. You have to know your market. You have to know who you're dealing with. Latin American cultures, for example, I don't know, I'm sure you've had similar experiences, Marty, that there is a huge amount of nepotism, but if you turn that around and you put it on the patriarch's lap, that absolutely we will put your nephew in that, and I know that you're going to make sure that he is successful. And now it's a family pride thing. This also works in Asia. Asia, it's where the, because of the personal pride and shame and all of these, you just have to really know your culture. I want to look at a backwards example for a second. Vietnam, for example, was not allowed to export to the United States up until, I think, the 90s. You jump in if you think I'm wrong, Doug or Marty, but it was something around then. Do you know that they are already the 27th largest goods trading partner with the United States? They export almost 25 billion into the United States. The United States exports only 5 billion. So it's, I wonder, I like finding these things out because I like to think about how did that happen? And you think, well, there were probably relationships, family relationships from people from Vietnam that were in the United States, and you build on whatever you can build on. I think that sometimes you can find a partner in a similar industry. Sometimes you're going to need, as Marty says, laws that pop up that you didn't know about. That's not a good situation. But when you rely too heavily on a local partner, you make the assumption, I've done it, that they know their market and they know their regulatory issues. And then sometimes a year or two later, you find out that they didn't, and they didn't have everything aligned. So as much as you want to find a partner to be able to make things move along more quickly, it's a double-edged sword. So you can't just rely on those partnerships. You have to do the homework yourself, and you have to find a way to put the things in order and to do your due diligence at a level that you don't need to do at home, because at home a lot of the things feel almost organic. You've been doing them for so long, you know the basic structure of common law, and all of a sudden you're in a place where it's completely different. So I think that finding partners, it's excellent, it's necessary, but there's a lot of hazards out there, and you can't, shortcuts almost always have a shortfall.
Shortcut to success.
And another example that was interesting to me was I was working with a company that had never been in the United States, worked in the United States, and I had this weird feeling because their product is botanical, and I came to find out that they were making what the FDA considers medical claims on their website.
Oh, wow.
It doesn't matter that they weren't in English. That was a surprise to me. I had absolutely no idea that, as far as the FDA is concerned, even if it's in Swahili, if you make a medical claim on your website, that website can be accessed. I see you smiling, Marty. and that website can be accessed from the United States, and therefore that website is in violation of FDA regulations. That company can never do business in the United States in its current state, ever.
Wow.
It's not, you can't just fix the website and go forward. If I hadn't done that piece of homework, it would everything that was invested after that would have been for naught. And so you have to be prepared to excavate, and you have to be prepared to get your hands dirty. I mean, we all need a pair of barn boots, and we have to be able to pull them on and get in there.
I love that. Thank you. Because if not, you're going to shortcut all of your long-term successes and get hurt both in the short and the long term. That is great information. Marty, building on that, because as we were talking earlier about the cloud and e-commerce, it seems like it would be so much easier to do business anywhere and you wouldn't have to be as discerning. So talk to us about your strategy and how you find the reliable research and evidence to protect your company's investment, reputation, and brand. How do you do that? And what are the key signals to say, wait, we got a problem here?
Yeah, this is just a fantastic question. We, as an organization, we spend a lot of time talking about how do we protect the brand, how do we make right decisions for the brand, how do we, not mess it up, don't give ourselves a bad name. So it is a constant, everyday kind of pumping the pump kind of effort in order to make sure that we're trying to have as much research as possible, and is the information viable, reasonable, truthful, actionable, and how do we get that? Great resources I've found, and I'm sure there's a lot that I'm missing, but the U.S. Commercial Service has been a great resource for us, especially their people who are on the ground in the different markets where we work. We try to stay in touch with them, at least the individuals assigned within our industry. Variety of chambers of commerce, especially the Global Chamber, and its resources, as well as the whatever U.S. complementary chamber of commerce that's in that given country can be a great resource for information. Local people in the industry are a fantastic one. Potential clients, if we're making a call and we're going to sit with them and we're trying to sell them something, and we're also trying to ask them for information and understand what does their world look like and what does the competitive landscape look like, or what do they know about us within the industry and the landscape. A big one I think might be the most effective is complementary product or service providers. So we sell a service. With our services, there's different types of equipment that go along with that. So when we start working in a given country, we're going to need those equipment supplies. We connect with that with those essentially supply chain partners who are moving the equipment that we need into the country. Typically, they already have a distribution partner, and one of the first meetings we'll look for is to meet with that equipment distribution partner, because if they're selling equipment in there, they have a really good outlook on the space. So looking for who runs in parallel towards our same end customer or similar. Quite often because they're going to be the closest to and have a really good pulse on what's going on locally. Newspapers, certainly, I've spent a lot of time reading English versions of foreign newspapers, more so than I read U.S. news. And then Google alerts are really powerful. Find competitors in the market, find customers in the market, and set up Google alerts where you're automatically getting alerted about any organization or company of interest, so that if anything is going on, you get a really quick info on it. A big, really important but simple thing to do that people don't realize is registering your trademark. You don't do that just one time in the U.S. Different countries have different trademark regulation requirements, so it's really important to any marks that you have, you need to get those registered and do that first simple step. Copyright your written material, visual materials, good stuff. But also you have to realize, I meet people who work for the biggest brands in the world that you would think would be looking to protect intellectual property, be it Microsoft or Sony or you name it, and it'd be entities that you'd be like, oh, I bet these guys have figured it out. I need to ask them, how are you protecting your intellectual property? And then they just start laughing and go, well, the reality is we try. We make a lot of efforts to try to make it difficult to rip, but you have to realize that there's just going to be some bleed, and that, as my grandfather would have said, part of a pig's better than no pig at all. So, let's, And when you're talking about China or India or some of these especially bigger markets, the part of the pig is bigger than everything you've got back home. So you just have to realize how big the opportunity is, and that if as long as you're continuing to innovate and lead, you're always going to be out in front of the copy or the knockoff. And there's a lot of value to made in the USA. And I tell people this all the time. Made in the USA means more in foreign markets than it does here.
I'm so glad to hear that. And you talk about the risk reward there, but I can't leave you without asking you, because you know that you have to sell something. You also know you have to collect the money. Yeah. What did you set up to be able to collect it 100%? I mean, that's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's not easy, and it takes some difficult conversations. And sometimes it means saying no. It means turning down what you think is going to be some business. I had a great mentor tell me one time that if you never say no, then you really don't have a strategy.
Amen.
So,
that's right.
So think real long and hard about whether or not you're going to be able to collect. Now, you can hedge that, and I was really excited that Export-Import Bank was reauthorized this year. I would officially mark that as the dumbest thing in the history of American politics if we had let Export-Import Bank go away. But that's a really great tool, and we found that by having export insurance and going to our contracts and putting that language in there clearly so that the customer understands, if you fail to pay, here's what's going to happen, and here's who's coming after you, and we'll make sure they get the money out of you. And and amazingly, we don't end up not having to use it, because when we're up front with them and help them understand, you're not just talking about some little company in Phoenix that, oh, so what if we don't pay, or they're not going to come to Southwest China and really make me pay. It's like, well, maybe we won't, but these guys will. And as a result, they don't test it. They might be slow on occasion.
Sure.
But once they realize that process is about to start and it's for real, we get paid. So
that is some wonderful advice there. Elisa, do you have something to add to that? And also, if you do, I'd like to know what advice you give folks about where do they go and find the right type of representation, lawyers, attorneys. What do you look for to be able to protect yourself?
That is a very loaded question. I honestly don't have a good answer. I find, I don't know if it's ever happened to Marty, but I have been disappointed by lawyers. Once I find a good one, I want to use his or her network to help me connect to other good ones. And that is, now sometimes, interestingly, the embassy, your embassy, so the U.S. embassy for you, Marty, the Swiss embassy for me, they oftentimes have a list of lawyers. And if they receive complaints, they take people off that list. That's a good thing.
That is.
And so I was in a circumstance where I needed a U.S. licensed lawyer when I was overseas in a country that was also licensed in that country that could help me. And in that case, I contacted the U.S. Embassy, and they were able to help me narrow it down very quickly because I needed something on an urgent basis and within 24 hours. And it was a marvelous resource. So just like Marty is talking about the U.S. government wants U.S. companies to succeed. I can tell you the Swiss government wants Swiss companies to succeed. And I'm impressed with the support mechanisms, and we just need to avail ourselves of that. So it's we're lucky now because payments are much more instantaneous. When someone tells you they paid you, you can verify, trust but verify quite quickly. This is very important. But you also, I would say, load it on the front end. As Marty explained so well, he explains that they're going to get paid.
Right.
It might you know, they're not going to be alone when they're going to, if they have to insist on getting paid. Similarly, go back to he talked about the contract, and I'll go back to the contract again. When you write that contract and you have your lawyer and their lawyer in the room, and you're going through it, talk about the mechanisms and be very upfront and very open about it. Again, you're talking about relationships. Paper loves ink. You can put anything you want on, anything ink goes on paper and it stays there. What really matters are the integrity of the parties involved, whether it's 2 parties or 10 parties, what their expectations are of each other, whether those relationships are solid and reliable, and they have to want what you're giving them enough. There is that. They want to be able to buy from you again. They know they have to pay you. And you also, on your end, you have to be a responsible supplier, whether that's a supplier of people or a supplier of things or a supplier of widgets or whatever it is that you're providing. You also have to be reasonable and don't let your customer get too much in the holes as either. You have to manage your ins and outs so that you're making sure that you're getting paid in a cycle that fits your cash flow as well. Don't overextend because of circumstances. That's bad management. That's unreasonable. And when you're in a new market with a new customer, go stepwise, go small. Build that trust. It's mutual. It's only good. Set everyone up for success. I know that sounds trite. I know you've heard it before, but you want to set up your relationship for success, your relationship with your partners, as Marty talked about, companies that work in parallel to you, and your customer and your suppliers. You want success. So start small. Yes, it's not as much money, but it's also not as much money to lose. So a little bit of wisdom goes a really long way.
I love that because it's about doing the right things to begin with, doing the prevention work, selling correctly, pricing it correctly, getting your money, then continuing to foster that relationship.
Absolutely.
So, Doug, we're going to wrap it up here with you because with the Global Chamber and the issues that Elisa and Marty have brought up, because they're so perfect in terms of understanding your market, protecting your market, becoming a thought leader in your market, aligning with the right people, finding and utilizing the people inside of the country and understanding the customs. What can you do from the Global Chamber to help folks like me that said, you know, I'm a little scared of international, and right now, understanding the import-export banks, like, okay, that reduced some of my fear. What can you do to help folks like me and or other companies to say, you know what, you can jump into international?
I was sitting here listening to Elisa and Marty talk and thinking back in my own career, you know, when would you have a chance, say you were developing a global strategy and you were implementing it, to be able to have Elisa and Marty and yourself in the room and be able to work on the strategy, work on the implementation? You know, it's very rare. You know, even sometimes even in multinationals, to have talented people like the two on the line. SMEs almost never have it. Very often it's just maybe one person, and they may not be nearly as talented as both Elisa and Marty are. So when you say whether to be afraid or not, and that they are afraid, that's a very valid emotion to have, because you should be afraid of what's going on, because you don't have that sense. And so that's a lot of why we created the Global Chamber. You know, I think Marty's mechanism that he created there, the complementary service provider, is basically a great mechanism to think about your own business now that you've got it kind of flowing of, hey, let's talk to these people and get their opinion about. So that's a great mechanism to use. However, they don't always know. Or if your own country, whether it's Switzerland or the US or Japan with Jetro or UK TI or Kotra for Korea, they often may only have a limited view of the local market around service providers and to be able to pull that together. And so our whole vision is is to create a village of people everywhere in the world. So if you're going to go to Accra, Ghana, you know, it's more than just relying potentially on the local service providers or your local government official or their local government official. It's someone there local on the ground who knows the international business and knows who's a good lawyer, who's a good logistics provider, knows the regulations, kind of has a much bigger picture of really what's going on. So I think one of the things that we all recognize is that, as we started out today, that technology is changing everything. It's allowing us to have information we never had before in a timely way, but the human element doesn't stop. You know, it's still there. And so to be able to, you know, implement a strategy and go forward, and to have an Elisa and a Marty, you know, in the room, or someone from the Global Chamber like one of our executive directors, or members like they are around the world, that's a powerful thing. So yes, use your phone. Be afraid. Get the information you need, but talk to people. Because in the end of the day, that's the combination of technology and people will allow you to do the things that you want to do, and that is, you know, you had asked earlier about, you know, how can you do this efficiently and productively and cost effectively. Well, one of the best ways to do that is to not totally mess up. You know, not pick a distributor or get a customer who doesn't pay, pick a distributor that doesn't work for you, you know, and seems like a good family but really isn't, or get customers that don't pay, or or get the wrong legal advice. I mean, these are, for a small business, potentially death knells. And so that's why the fear is valid. That's why, you know, having a network that knows what's going on, not just in one country but in others, is very critically important, and why I think more people are becoming more successful at this is because more people realize that getting the information, surrounding yourself with a team, and certainly some of the services that we and others provide, you know, are helping more and more.
Well, I tell you, as the moderator today and the host of the radio program, The Magnificent Leader, I have been so privileged to be with you, Elisa, and Marty. And I just want to give a shout out to the Global Chamber, because I really believe one of the great benefits to the Global Chamber is that you bring together wonderful people who really want to do good work, and they can answer questions, because so many times you don't know what to ask, and other people in that room will know what to ask, and everyone can really help elevate everyone. I want to thank all of our participants out there today, and I really echo what Doug said. I can't believe all the information we got from Elisa and Marty right here, and you didn't even have to pay for it. You just had to sign on. You were really, really fortunate folks today. And signing off from the Global Chamber, I'm Patty Azar, and thank you so much.